It's great to welcome back to the program Bill Scher, who is contributing editor to Politico Magazine. Bill has caught the ire, actually, of some in our audience, but we'll maybe get to that later, or maybe it'll just sort of surface naturally during the conversation. Bill, so let's talk a little bit about midterm strategy. We're now about 10 months away from the November 6th midterm elections. There are a lot of different lines of interest in these particular midterms, specifically because of Donald Trump as president of the U.S. Generally speaking, what's your outlook on these midterms for the left?
Well, the outlook is very good. Almost in most special elections in 2017, the ones that have been more nationally well known, like the Doug Jones race in Alabama or the John Ossoff race in Georgia, as well as further down ballot, state and local races, Democratic turnout has been above the baseline, and Republican turnout has been below the baseline. So even in races where Republicans won, like that Georgia race with John Ossoff, the Democratic decline from 2006 was much less than what you saw on the Republican side. So if that pattern holds in 2018, when the races are going to be even, the House map, I mean, none of the maps are super favorable to Democrats, mind you. But if you have a similar pattern of weak Republican turnout and strong Democratic turnout, it should be a very good year.
Yeah, so in terms of patterns, I mean, when we talk about midterms during the first midterm for a president, so to speak, the sort of rule of thumb is it's good for the party not in the White House. In 2002, for George W. Bush, post 9/11, that was an exception to that rule. But generally speaking, that's a bit of conventional wisdom. Turnout is also typically significantly lower for these midterms than in presidential elections. Is there something in particular, other than just the craziness sort of caused by the Trump era, that you think might reverse some of those trends or exacerbate them in 2018?
Well, it's typical for the out party to have good midterms. The in party, the party in power, has to govern. Governing requires trade-offs that tend to depress some element of the governing party's base, and the out party is just mad at whatever the in party is doing, and so they're energized. So Obama had two terrible midterms. I'd say it's somewhat typical for there to be some kind of mitigating factor in one of your two midterms. So for George Bush, as you said, 2002 was pretty good for Republicans. That was post 9/11. By 2006, the wear and tear of being the party in power finally caught up with the Republicans, and Democrats had a wave year that brought Nancy Pelosi into the speaker's chair. In 1994, Bill Clinton had a terrible first 2 years. He couldn't get a stimulus passed. He passed a tax increase that was a backtrack from his middle-class tax cut pledge. Hillary Care was a disaster. The crime bill was very unpopular. Terrible 1994. Newt Gingrich becomes speaker. 1998, there's impeachment, and there's a pro-Clinton backlash to the impeachment. That's a pretty good midterm year for Democrats. So so far this year, there's no mitigating circumstance that's going to help Trump and the Republicans stave off a bad midterm so far. Maybe something happens between now and November that I can't foresee. But Trump's approval has been so bad for so long. Very little seems to actually move the needle. He bounces between mid 30s and low 40s. Anything within that range is theoretically bad for Republicans writ large. So it'd have to be something pretty dramatic to help Republicans avoid a bad midterm year.
Okay, so then now let's get more into the micro of the strategy with the different types of races that Democrats might find themselves facing. And I think this is where I'm seeing posts on our subreddit from people very, very displeased with Bill Scher, as the staff here knows. There have been a couple different movements that have cropped up over the last couple of years, Bill, as I know you know, that have a focus not on flipping red seats blue, but on primarying anybody within the Democratic Party that is identified as not to the left enough. And my general view has been that's a great idea, but let's be cautious and sort of prudent with that strategy, because that's a strategy that in some cases, in a world with limited resources that one can spend on any one election, it could end up actually turning some blue seats red. So let me just first say only that and turn it over to you. What's your sense of these movements that seem to be pushing, in some cases, the primarying of Democrats that they don't see as to the left enough, at the possible risk of giving Republicans a win?
Well, let me be clear, because I feel like I write a lot of things on this subject that get twisted around on the intertubes. I've never argued that Democrats should only run right-leaning candidates.
Sure.
I wrote a piece called "Urge to Purge" that was critical of the decision to have a left-wing challenge to Dianne Feinstein in California as a distraction of resources. Now, it's very possible that Kevin DeLeon, who's the main guy who's running against Feinstein, he could win. I'm not saying he can't win. And there's another piece I wrote after Doug Jones won Alabama, which is maybe this is a time for a generic Democrat to face off against Donald Trump in 2020. And that got twisted around to saying Bill Scher wants centrist or center-right candidates. That's not generic. That's taking a more distinctive ideological path, which Doug Jones did not do. Doug Jones didn't run as an anti-abortion Democrat or a diehard pro-gun Democrat. And even that article wasn't an argument for what Democrats should do up and down the ballot. That was what's going to make sense to match up with Donald Trump in 2020, and that's it. Not a template for the party forevermore. So I think you got to be very specific in what kind of race you're talking about here.
Right.
It may well be that if you ran an army of progressive populist candidates across the country in 2018, that they would do very well. But it's also possible you can run a bunch of bland, flavorless candidates in 2018, and they might do very well also. And you're not going to have that kind of simple control where you do one thing one time and you assess it. There's probably going to be a mix of candidates in 2018. And maybe we'll be able to tease out better who has the edge in this ideological battle for 2020, which I think is going to get played out in the presidential primary no matter what. But if you are, like I assume many of your audience, in believing fervently that a progressive populist, Bernie-crat, Democratic socialist candidate is the only way to win races in red-leaning areas, I think there are some contrary data points from 2017. Rob Quist ran as a Bernie-crat in Montana and lost, although did better than the previous House candidate that year. But Steve Bullock is the governor of Montana, and he won in 2016, and he is not a Bernie-crat. He's much more of a moderate.
Yeah, and I think that's why, my approach has been, and it sounds like it's similar to what you're saying, although maybe worded differently, which is you have to understand the context. And often the one that comes up is Joe Manchin, right? Joe Manchin in West Virginia, really, really popular, understandably popular to bash him as arguably the most right-leaning Democratic senator, period. And I've pointed out that you don't have unlimited resources. And so if you want to challenge, if you want to primary Manchin, you might end up blowing a bunch of money and Manchin still wins the primary. You might win the primary against Manchin, and then you end up turning that seat over to a real right-wing Republican, which there's no shortage of in West Virginia to begin with. Maybe that money is better spent trying to flip a couple of congressional seats or something like that. And some people understand that pragmatic approach, and some people just get furious with me about it.
Well, the Manchin, there is a primary challenger to Manchin. There's and I don't think that person gave very much attention. So it hasn't been an actual resource drain. And I think the argument that a left-wing candidate is poised to win in West Virginia, if only given the chance, I don't really see a lot of evidence for that based on what has happened in West Virginia over the past several decades.
Yeah.
Now, you look at and you look at look what happened in the red areas in 2017. Some people say, well, Zephyr Teachout in 2016 didn't win in upstate New York because Hillary was a drag on the ticket. And Russ Feingold couldn't win in Wisconsin because Hillary was a drag on the ticket. Well, that's not true for Steve Bullock. Steve Bullock won in Montana anyway, and Rob Quist couldn't when Hillary was not on the ticket.
Yeah. Doug
Jones, again, not a right-wing Democrat, but not a left-wing Democrat either. And yes, he ran against the pedophile in Alabama. I'm not saying that's not an important data point to look at here. But he was able to energize. He kept that Democratic base revved, not so much because of him, because the other guy was so bad. I mean, the argument against running bland, flavorless candidates is that's not good enough, no matter how bad your opponent is. You know, Hillary couldn't beat Donald Trump. Well, Doug Jones did beat Roy Moore. So depending on your candidate, your opposing candidate, maybe that is going to be good enough. And maybe being a single payer candidate in a red state is not magic to winning over Trump voters. Maybe there's going to be examples that disprove that. I mean,
Sure.
not everything is going to be cut and dry. But we haven't seen evidence in 2017 that the Bernie crap model is somehow impervious to Republican assault. So we're going to have more test cases in 2018 to look at.
Last thing I want to touch on, the tax plan, okay? I am very, very worried that Trump and his cronies will successfully sell the fact that a tax plan was done rather than exactly how it will affect voters as a success, as a campaign promise done, and that it will be tough for Democrats to actually argue against that, not because the facts aren't with them, but because the optics of it are going to be favorable to Republicans. What do you think?
I think both parties, I think the Republicans are overselling the tax bill and Democrats are underselling the tax bill insofar as the political landscape is concerned for 2018. When Republicans are saying, I mean, Trump literally said, this is a massive Christmas gift for you. And that's not really true. It has uneven impact across the country, depending on your income bracket and how you itemize and all that sort of thing. It's not like a Bush-style tax cut. I mean, if you remember from the Bush years, everybody got a $300 check, or most people got a $300 check.
Right.
And Democrats would say, this is crumbs. The top 1% are getting tens of thousands of dollars, and you're just getting this piddly little check. And the response was, you are being really condescending to the working men and women of this country who appreciate that $300. So stop being so dismissive of the amount. And that was a winning political counterattack to Democrats in 2004. Now, the Obama years had its own tax code called the Making Work Pay tax credit, which wasn't a standalone check. It was simply your withholding was not as much as was taken out of your paycheck week to week. And the Obama economist said that's actually going to be better for the economy. It'll be more stimulative. If people get a check, they stick it in the bank and they don't spend it. If it's a little bit every week, they're more likely to spend it. That'll have a collective Keynesian effect on the economy. This tax cut is like Obama's tax cut in that respect.
Yes, effective, I believe, February 1st, the new tax brackets go into play and people who would be saving money would immediately see more money in their paychecks.
Of varying amounts. I mean, not everyone's going to get the same thing.
Yep.
So there's going to be a subtle difference in people's paychecks this year, which people may or may not notice. And they also have to wonder what's going to happen when I actually do my tax returns in April of 2019, which isn't going to happen before the midterms. Maybe my itemizations aren't going to work out in my favor,
right,
depending on what has transpired in other parts of the tax cut. What happens with my health insurance premiums now that the individual mandate has been nullified, although technically not nullified until 2019, but do health insurance companies jack up their premiums in advance? That we don't know. What do states and cities do in response to this? Are there property tax increases that are going to occur? People don't distinguish between tax cuts. They look at their net on November 2018. What is my overall cost of living as a result of Trump's policies? Total hypothetical. Let's say Trump pulls out of NAFTA between now and then. Does that cause a price shock at the grocery store? You're not going to say, thanks for my $20 on my withholding, but now my grocery bill is 20% higher. You haven't really helped me out very much. There's so many uncertainties here that I don't think we know. That's dangerous for Republicans. Democrats are starting to oversimplify the case and say this is a tax cut for the wealthy and a tax increase for the middle class. That's only true. I mean, there's individual examples immediately, again, depending on your circumstance. But the larger case is the individual tax cuts expire in 2025 for individuals and not for corporations.
Right.
Nobody cares about 2025 and 2018. The tax code's going to change probably multiple times between now and then. People want to know, what is their deal now? What has Trump delivered for me today? And if you're telling people you're going to get a tax increase and they don't right away, then you're the person who's overshot.
Wow. Bill Scher, you've said it all, contributing editor to Politico Magazine. We'll keep checking in with you as we close in on November 6th. Thanks as always.
Always a pleasure.